Hello, everyone. So this is Professor Wilfred Ngoa. Thank you so much for joining this class today. I will be the course professor, but today we will have a guest professor as well. Dr. Emanuela Monaco will be joining us as well. So today we will just start with a very brief overview of the course syllabus. I'm going to do that first, and then I will hand over to Dr. Emanuela. I just want to say that, just for housekeeping, if you are not speaking, please mute your phone. And then at the end, when we have time for questions, you can unmute your phone. All right, so I just want to say that this is a collaboration between ICT University and the Global Health Catalyst. Obviously, we are very committed to making sure that this course is beneficial, is useful for you, especially at this time when we have COVID-19. So some of the lessons that we are going to be giving the lectures are going to have very good, practical applications for what's happening in our world today. So without much ado, I'm going to start. So the first general, just talk about the syllabus itself. So this course will really introduce all of you to information systems and the concepts and applications that are widely used within public health and epidemiology. So a lot of the applications that we're going to be seeing are kind of seeing how you can apply information and communication technologies in epidemiology. In terms of the schedule, or the objective, the course will enable you to understand what ICTs are. So today, after this introduction on epidemiology, next week we will have a class really focused on introducing you to what information and communication technologies are. And then in the following weeks, we will be able to show really good practical applications on how this connects. So, this should be able to enable you to be able to practice, apply these in e-medicine, mobile health technologies, telemedicine, and then you can see how you can manage this in service delivery, healthcare systems. So looking at the course syllabus, so today obviously is April 6th. So this course is going to run from April 6th to July 13th. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to be the primary professor for this class, but I'm going to have a lot of help from experts, from different experts. So virtually every day we will have, a guest professor who is going to cover, one of the topics. And for today, if you look at this schedule, by the way, is already posted online. So if you log onto your Moodle account, you should be able to get access to this. So I'm not gonna go over the details for each day. I'm just gonna cover to show you the main highlights. So for today, we will have an overview of the course itself, and then an introduction to epidemiology. And then we will have that introduction will be made by Dr. Monaco. And then, after that, we actually have a series of videos that have been posted already online. You can access those videos through your Moodle account as well. And these are, a series of videos that are really focused on COVID-19. And it's going to be part of your homework for this week. So it means that you have to watch these videos. And then after that, there are some questions. And these are not tough questions. They're just basically testing your understanding of what you got from those videos and the lecture today. And then it also kind of seeks some feedback from you on how you see how you can apply those concepts, especially in addressing the COVID-19 epidemic. And then next week, we will look at information technologies in public health and healthcare. We have a guest professor as well for that day. And then April 20th. So this is going to be every Monday at this time, 12 p.m. in Boston, and I think it's 4 p.m. GMT. So, and we'll have these different guest professors each time. The key dates to remember here So today we start the class, and then May 18th, we will have a midterm exam. And then the final exam will be on July 13th. We actually are doing, it's a potential that at the end of this class, the papers that you are able to submit, we want to be able to put that together for a publication. And obviously, that'll be a good opportunity for you to get published. So in terms of the class requirements and expectations, so what we really want to emphasize is that, obviously this is an online class, and that's what, ICT University is very famous for this, and what we really want is that we require that you attend the classes each day, the live classes. It provides a very good opportunity for you to interact with the guest professors and ask questions. Even though after the lecture, you can always post more questions, and we'll have the chance to answer them for you. So you want to log into the platform at the beginning and make sure that all the connections are working. It's your responsibility to notify the course facilitator. So if you look at the syllabus, you have all the email contacts there. So you can email, and we're also recording this lecture, which means that you'll be posted afterwards, so you can review this asynchronously. But it's important that you attend the class so that you can interact and ask questions. We also will have every week homework. So it means that your assignment is going to be posted every Monday. We expect that assignment to be due, I would say Sunday night, but the time for submission will be Monday morning. Monday before the lecture starts. And so, so you really, it's important that you check online to make sure that you do your homework and assignments before the next class each week. In terms of the grading for this course, so active participation, like I mentioned, is very important. So if you are live on the class every week and participating actively online when we post discussions, then that gives you automatically 10% as part of your score overall grade. And then the weekly assignments themselves are going to count for 30%. A writing assignment, like I mentioned, which we may include that as a publication at the end of the semester, that's going to count for 10%. You get more information on that as we go through the semester. And then, the midterm exam is going to count for 20%. And then we're going to have a final exam, which is 30%. I usually say, I usually ask students at the beginning of each semester that what is their goal for the class. And I just want to point out that you should realize that your goal is the same as mine. My goal for you is to get an A grade, which means that it's not just to pass it, but understand the concepts. And to get an A grade means that as much as we will have really excellent professors for this class who will do their best to communicate the knowledge to you, it's important that on your part that you do your own part, which is the homework, and be able to complete all the assignments that are given to you. And if you do that, I would say that, we all have the same goal, which is to get an A grade. And an A grade will be, if you get scored 90 to 100% overall. And then, I don't usually want to talk about the B grade because I don't want that to be your goal, but the range will be 80 to 89. And the C will be 70 to 79, and D 60 to 69. And we hope that nobody gets to fail this course. All right, so here I have my contact email, and then, the course assistant who will be helping coordinate. You also have that. We should be able to post an updated email for her as well, Noella, on ICT University. So without much ado, I will introduce the guest professor for today, who is an expert in epidemiology, Dr. Onaku. And I would say that, as you may have heard from my accent, I'm also from, Africa. I was born in Cameroon, and it's very nice to be able to have this opportunity to give back, some of what's being learned out here. And Dr. Onaku is the same, like a diaspora. And I'm very glad that she can be able to give this lecture today. Obviously, the importance of that is that you don't only have a professor who has the knowledge, but you have a professor who understands the context from which most of the students are coming from, understands the culture and the background. So we're very delighted and honored to have Dr. So I'm going to hand over the screen to her. Actually, before I do that, I wanted to mention what you're going to see in terms of your assignment today. So the videos that are online are really going to talk about how you can use epidemiology to fight the COVID-19 and how to identify and measure outbreaks like that, like COVID. And through those videos, you're going to have a series of videos that are going to talk about, the first part is going to just be an introduction, on the understanding of outbreaks. And then the next one is going to be an introduction about surveillance systems and how and why you can track outbreaks like COVID-19. So I really want to make sure that you know where to find this. These are going to be on Moodle. And then once you watch those videos, there are 2 questions that you're supposed to do that are due on April 30th. So make sure that you get to answer those questions. And again, those are not going to be difficult questions, but just make sure that you understand what's going on. And I hope that, after you do that, you may actually be smarter about addressing, the current pandemic that the world is facing. All right, so I'm going to introduce the guest professor for today, Dr. Emanuela Onaku. So just give me a second here. I'm going to make her the presenter. Onaku, are you there?
Yes, I'm here now.
Excellent. Okay, good. So now you can kick me out and you can be the presenter.
How do I kick you out?
Tulu can help. Maybe Tulu can help you.
No, Nako, just switch to your slide. You don't need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, I'm here now.
Excellent. So, Dr. Onaku, over to you.
Okay, good day, everyone. I'm Dr. Onaku Emanuela. Thank you, Professor Wilfred, for this opportunity that you've given me to contribute my own quota in giving back to the continent of Africa. So I'm actually a medical doctor and I got my MD degree in Nigeria a few years ago, and I came over to Boston to do a master's in public health and just recently got that. So I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk to, colleagues from different walks of life that are now interested in seeing how ICT and epidemiology can, come together. Now, this course is actually a basic overview of epidemiology, and in today's session, we're going to define epidemiology and explain the role of the epidemiologists in public health. We will learn how epidemiologists characterize public health problems and steps an epidemiologist takes when investigating a disease outbreak. After this session, you should be able to define and classify epidemiology, describe basic terminology and concepts of epidemiology, identify types of data sources, identify basic methods of data collection and interpretation, identify epidemiologic study designs, describe a public health problem in terms of time, place, and person, identify the key components of a descriptive epidemiology outbreak investigation. First, we will learn about the public health approach and how it relates to the public health core sciences. Let's talk about public health in a broader context. Public health problems are diverse and can include infectious diseases, chronic diseases, emergencies, injuries, environmental health problems, as well as other health threats. Regardless of the topic, we will take the same approach to a public health problem by following 4 general steps. First, we will ask, what is the problem? In public health, we identify the problem by using surveillance systems to monitor health events and behaviors occurring among a population. After we've identified the problem, the next question will be, what is the cause of the problem? For example, there are factors that might make certain populations more susceptible to diseases, such as something in the environment or certain behaviors that people are practicing. The next question we are going to now, after we've identified the risk factors related to the problem, we will ask what intervention works best to address the problem. We will look at what has worked in the past in addressing this same problem, and if a proposed intervention makes sense with our affected population. In the last step, we will ask, how can we implement the intervention? Given the resources we have and what we know about the affected population, will this work? As we go through this course, you will see different examples of this public health approach at work. To implement public health approach, practitioners use and apply scientific methods. These methods come from a series of core sciences that provide the foundation. These sciences include public health surveillance, which we use to monitor public health situation. Epidemiology enables us to determine where disease originates, how or why they move through populations, and how we can prevent them. We will learn more about epidemiology in today's course. Public health laboratories support public health by performing tests to confirm this disease diagnosis. Laboratories also support public health by conducting research and training. As we continue to move from the use of paper to document electronic health records, public health informatics continues to increase in importance. Informatics deals with the methods for collecting, compiling, and presenting health information. It enables us to use electronic data effectively when addressing a public health situation. Prevention effectiveness is closely linked to public health policy. Prevention effectiveness studies provide important economic information for decision makers to help them choose the best option available. Together, all these 5 core sciences can help us protect and promote public health by giving public health practitioners the answer they need. Public health is better able to respond to this situation by using contributions from each of these sciences. One science alone cannot answer these questions and provide a solution. It is the application of these core sciences together. Next, we will learn about what epidemiology is and how it aligns with the scientific approach and its purpose in public health practice. Epidemiology is defined as the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states among specified population and the application of that study to the control of health problems. The distribution of this disease in this case refers to who gets disease, what are their characteristics, where does the disease occur, and when does it occur. So in essence, person, place, and time. Epidemiology focuses on making comparisons in order to establish cause-effect relationships, evaluate information, and make good decisions that will improve outcomes. Epidemiology is a discipline, a way of thinking about problems, so you can draw valid conclusions and make good decisions, even in areas beyond the realm of epidemics and the usual concept of health. Epidemiology is actually based on 2 fundamental principles. The first principle is that human disease does not occur at random. There are factors or determinants which can increase or decrease the likelihood of developing a disease. And the second principle is that these causal and preventive factors, the determinants of disease, can be identified through systematic investigation of population. Epidemiology has 2 broad types: descriptive epidemiology and analytic epidemiology. The aim of descriptive epidemiology is to describe the distribution of disease and determinants. It provides a way of organizing and analyzing data to describe the variations in disease. frequency among populations by geographical areas and over time, that is person, place, and time. In essence, descriptive epidemiology is used to generate hypotheses about the determinants of disease by exploring potential associations between risk factors and health outcome. It is actually antecedent to the second type of epidemiology known as analytic epidemiology. Analytic epidemiology aims to investigate hypotheses about the cause of a disease by studying how exposures or risk factors relate to disease. It is carried out to actually now test that hypothesis that has been generated through the use of a descriptive epidemiology. The purpose of epidemiology in public health practice is to discover the agent, host, and environmental factors that affect health, to determine the relative importance of causes of illness, disability, and death, to identify those segments of the population that have the greatest risk from specific causes of ill health, and to evaluate the effectiveness of health programs and services in improving population health. Now, to solve health problems, epidemiology practitioners use 4 scientific approaches that includes data collection, assessment, hypothesis testing, and action. When using the scientific approach, data are collected and an initial assessment or hypothesis is conducted. The hypothesis is then tested and the resulting information is used to take action. Now, this portion of solving health problems illustrates how the epidemiologist uses each step in scientific approach. First, data is collected about health problems occurring among the population through public health surveillance. The data that is collected include information about when the problem occurred, as well as where and who were affected, that is person, place, and time. This is known as descriptive epidemiology, like I explained earlier. Next, the epidemiologist establishes inferences on the basis of the collected data, draws initial conclusions on the basis of those data. From there, he or she uses the information to generate hypotheses about what might be causing the health problem. Then, the how and why of a condition is determined by conducting tests or studies to determine if the hypothesis is accurate. This determination of how and why is known as analytic epidemiology, which has also been briefly introduced earlier. Finally, the epidemiologist takes action. In public health, this action is known as intervention. We take action to intervene to prevent a condition from spreading further or to promote healthy behaviors. The epidemiologist recommends or implements some form of action at the population level. For example, a community intervention. One notable example could actually stem from the fact that when in 1983, I think it was initially suddenly noticed that HIV/AIDS could actually be transmitted through bloodborne, through infected blood. There and then, studies were conducted, and those results were replicated, so much so that the intervention that came up was the fact that all blood products has to be screened for the presence of the HIV virus. That's one form of intervention that has occurred due to the fact that the public health practice was conducted the way it was supposed to be conducted. Let's review what we've learned about epidemiology so far. But these questions, I feel, are questions. I have a couple of questions on this PowerPoint presentation, and I feel that these are questions that you could just answer at home to help you get a better grasp of everything that has been covered so far. This is another question slide. The next topic is epidemiology key terms. Now that we know what epidemiology is, let's review some key terminologies that are commonly associated with studies. You will see a couple of these terms throughout this course. The first thing is endemic. An endemic disease is a condition that is always present in a certain population or geographic location. For example, malaria is endemic in sub-Saharan Africa. An epidemic or outbreak is a disease occurrence among a population that is in excess of what is expected in a given time and place. So an example of an epidemic was like the SARS epidemic that occurred in China in 2002. Pandemic are epidemics occurring at multiple places across the globe. So it's a global disease outbreak. Epidemics can actually expand to later on become pandemics, as we are seeing with the COVID-19, as we also saw with SARS and a couple of other epidemics that have occurred in recent times. Cluster is a group of cases in a specific time and place that might be more than expected, while rate is a number of cases occurring during a specific period, and it's always dependent on the size of the population during that period. This is another brain teaser that I feel can be answered when you're having private study time. This is under brain teaser too. The next thing we're going to deal with is the epidemic curves. An epidemic curve shows the frequency of new cases over time based on the date of onset of disease. The shape of the curve in relation to the incubation period for a particular disease actually gives us clue about the source. There are three basic types of epidemic curve: point source epidemic, continuous common source epidemic, and propagated or progressive source epidemic. An incubation period is defined as the time interval between exposure to an infectious agent and the onset of the first symptoms of that infectious disease. This is characteristic for each disease agent. So for instance, for COVID-19, the incubation period is 14 days from the initial studies that have been conducted. And this is the basis for the proposed length of quarantine of potentially exposed individuals. Now, in point source epidemic, a common source is usually involved, such as contaminated food, and all the exposures tend to occur in a relatively brief period. The point source epidemic curve is characterized by a rapid increase in cases, followed by a somewhat slower decline, and all the cases actually tend to fall within one incubation period. So if we observe this graph closely, the epidemic actually started sometime on the 29th of April and ended on the 21st of May in 2004. This is a graph from a hepatitis outbreak. The incubation period for hepatitis A actually ranges from 15 to 50 days, with an average of about 28 to 30 days. In this particular graph, we will observe that the cases actually occurred within a 30-day span of time. And so it tells us that, okay, yes, this is a point source epidemic. Now, continuous common source epidemic. The epidemic may also rise to a peak and then fall, but the cases do not all occur within a span of a single incubation period, implying that there is an ongoing source of contamination. The downslope of the curve may be very sharp if the common source is removed, or gradual if the outbreak is allowed to exhaust itself. Now, this graph, the epidemic curve is actually from the cholera outbreak that occurred in Broad Street area of London in 1854 that was investigated by Dr. John Snow, the father of epidemiology. Cholera has an incubation period of 1 to 3 days, and even though residents began to flee when the outbreak erupted, you can see that the outbreak lasted for more than a single incubation period. This suggests that there was an ongoing source of infection, and in this case, the ongoing source of infection was the Broad Street pump. When Dr. John Snow actually noticed that that was the ongoing source of infection, he actually made the government to actually remove that Broad Street pump, and that caused a rapid decline in the number of cases of cholera that was seen during that period. The last kind of epidemic curve is the propagated epidemic curve. The propagated epidemic curve usually has a series of successively larger peaks, which are one incubation period apart. The successive waves tend to involve more and more people until the pool of susceptible people is exhausted or control measures are implemented. Now, this graph is an epidemic curve shown from an outbreak of measles that began with a single index case, as seen on the 4th of April, who infected a number of other individuals. The incubation period for measles averages 10 days with a range of 7 to 18 days. One or more of the people infected in the initial wave infected a group of people who became the second wave of infection. So here, transmission is person to person rather than from a common source. This is an ideal example, but however, in reality, most of these epidemics don't produce this classic pattern. I'm sure at the back of our minds, we should be thinking, do we think that the COVID-19 should be this kind of epidemic? And in my opinion, I think yes. Actually, it is a propagated epidemic curve. Now, we'll look at the formula for calculating rates. In epidemiology, we cannot stop at simply comparing number of cases. We also need to compare rates. Rates helps us compare health problems among different populations that include two or more groups who differ by selected characteristics. For example, we might compare persons who had not eaten in a particular restaurant for a particular meal with persons who had eaten at that same restaurant for that meal and look for cases of foodborne illness. Or we might compare men with women for how often they display a certain risky behavior. For example, driving intoxicated. By comparing population characteristics, we can observe more clearly what factors might be associated with a health event, such as what might be making persons ill. We can then determine what actions to take, such as facilitating programs and activities to support health or prevent more persons from becoming ill. Rates also help us determine unusual activity by comparing the baseline rate of disease or condition with a current event, such as whether a spike or decline in influenza reports are greater or less than what is typically expected. To calculate a rate, we first need to determine the frequency of disease, which includes the number of cases of the illness or condition we are counting. Next, the size of the population at risk, and the period during which we are calculating the rate. After the frequency of disease is identified, the illness rate is calculated by dividing the number of cases of disease for the selected period by the size of the population at risk for that same period, and this number is multiplied by 100 to take it to percentage. This formula provides the number of cases as a percentage for the population for a given period. Members of the American Legion gathered for the annual American Legion Convention held in July 21st through 24th in 1976 in Philadelphia. Soon after the convention began, a substantial number of attendees were admitted to the hospital emergency department or were examined in doctors' offices with acute onset of fever, chills, headache, malaise, dry cough, and muscle pain. More troublesome is that during July 26 to August 1st, a total of 18 conventioners died, reportedly from pneumonia. In the morning of August 2nd, a nurse at a veterans hospital in Philadelphia called CDC to report cases of severe respiratory illness among convention attendees. Subsequent conversations that day with public health officials uncovered an additional 71 cases among persons who had attended the convention. The goal was to find out why these conventioners were becoming ill and in some cases dying. These cases of unexplained pneumonia were investigated and subsequently given the name Legionnaire's disease because of the association with the attendance at the American Legion Convention during July 1976. This chart here depicts how CDC investigators focused on a particular hotel as the possible source of the outbreak because that was a common factor among all the ill men. The investigators wanted to find out if any trends existed by age group among hotel guests who became ill. Here you can see three elements that constituted the epidemiologic rate. Disease frequency, that's the number who became ill, the unit size of the population, and the selected time of interest. We can calculate the rates at which each age group became ill after staying at or attending a meeting at Hotel A during the convention by using the basic formula. As we can observe from this table, we would notice that the age group with the largest number who became ill were those aged between 50 to 59 years. However, the age group with the highest rate of persons becoming ill were those aged between 70 years or older. At times, raw numbers can tell you valuable information. However, as you see displayed in this table, without examining the rates associated with these raw numbers, the data can be misleading. Next, okay, this is a knowledge check that I think we can actually do at home when we're reviewing the slides. Next, we will go through the experimental and observational epidemiology. Let's examine different types of epidemiologic studies. Epidemiology study designs can be classified basically into experimental and observational. And then observational study designs can be further divided into descriptive studies and analytic studies. All experimental studies are analytic studies. In an experimental study, the investigator actually controls certain factors within the study from the beginning. An example of this is vaccine efficacy trial that might be conducted by the National Institute of Health. In such a trial, the investigators randomly control who receives the test vaccine and who does not among a limited group of participants. Then they observe the outcome to determine if it should be used more widely. However, in an observational study, the epidemiologist does not control the circumstance, so it's like a natural experiment. These studies can be further subdivided, like I had explained, into descriptive and analytical studies. Now, descriptive studies are actually the more basic epidemiologic studies. All these examples I gave here, case series / case reports, ecologic studies, and cross-sectional studies are actually examples of descriptive studies. They actually are hypothesis generating, like I had explained earlier. While examples of analytic studies are cohort studies and case control studies, some schools of thought will actually put cross-sectional studies as an analytical study because depending on what one is trying to study, a cross-sectional study can actually still serve as an analytic study. Either ways, analytic studies are actually hypothesis testing studies. And like I had said earlier, all experimental studies are analytic studies. Examples of experimental studies are clinical trials. The time, place, and person is the mantra of the epidemiologist. Another way of comparing descriptive and analytic epidemiology is to say that during the descriptive process, we are concerned with when the population was affected, where they were affected, and who specifically was affected. From observations gathered during a descriptive process, a hypothesis is generated about the causes of observed patterns and the factors that increase risk for disease or injury. To test a hypothesis, epidemiologists must use an analytic epidemiology process in which they ask how and why was the population affected. Now let's look at an example. In 1982, an epidemiologist in the Georgia Department of Public Health became interested in the number of deaths associated with farm tractors. He determined he could examine this problem by using readily available data, which was death certificate records that were included in an existing surveillance system. He obtained the death certificate records for all deaths that had occurred in Georgia during 1971 through 1981 that were associated with farm tractor incidents. After collecting the data, he used the information to describe the hypothesis for further study. We will talk about his hypothesis in a moment, but first let's look at the descriptive epidemiology. This graph describes the when for 166 of the farm tractor associated deaths. We can examine the data by looking at the time of day when the deaths occurred. What inferences we can make from this graph is actually obvious. The peak in deaths occurred just before lunch and during the afternoon, during the late afternoon, as you can see, between 11 to 12 and 4 to 5 p.m. A decrease in deaths occurred from noon to 1 p.m. We can infer that deaths occur when farmers were probably most fatigued right before lunch, which might lead to the increase in deaths in the late morning. More deaths occur in late afternoon when children are home from school. Conversely, few deaths occur when the farmers are probably eating their lunch. This graph describes the WHO. It indicates the number of deaths by age group. From this graph, we can see that there's an increase in the number of deaths occurring among older persons, which again is part of descriptive analysis. Now, but if we were to analyze this data, it might be sorry, I think I had a problem with the network for a bit. I'm sorry about that. So if we were to look at this graph, if you look at the numbers, it looks as if those that were aged 60 to 69 years old had the highest number of deaths. But it will be, by just looking at the numbers, we cannot actually tell which age group is at greatest risk for death, because these numbers are absolute count of events and not rates. Like I had mentioned earlier, rates gives us a better idea, a better picture of what's happening, not just the absolute numbers. So without the population size for each age group, we cannot actually compare the relative risk. Does the higher number of deaths among people aged 60 to 69 years old, does it reflect the fact that the users of the tractors were predominantly older? That the older tractor users might be more likely to have an unintentional injury or less likely to survive an incident? We need to understand who is driving the tractor. Now, why do you think that the tractor-related deaths occur more also among those aged 0 to 9 year age group? Are these children playing on tractors and fatally injuring themselves? This example actually illustrates how descriptive epidemiology can be used to characterize a specific problem in terms of when, where, and who, and it can help generate a hypothesis for further study to answer how and why the problem occurs. For some reason, I'm coming. For some reason, I can't advance to the next slide. Okay, I'm back. This map describes where it indicates the number of deaths by county in Georgia. Most of the deaths occurred in the northern areas of Georgia, which has a more mountainous terrain. Fewer deaths occurred in south central Georgia, which is characterized by a much flatter farmland. So one would possibly want to know what are some of the possible explanations for this geographical distribution. Remember that the map indicates the number of deaths and not the rate. The numbers possibly reflect differences in population or the number of tractors being used. More farming occurs in south central Georgia. Therefore, the number of tractors probably does not explain the difference. Perhaps geographic differences exist in the experience or skill level of those using the tractors. This is a knowledge check that we can answer during our private reading time. This one is also one of them. The next topic is going to be epidemiology data sources and study design. Now we have covered definitions, key terms, and approaches to epidemiology. Let's turn to the sources epidemiology use and the methods they use to collect data for studies. How are the data from all these sources collected? Here are some methods and examples for each of the main sources of data. This list is actually not exhaustive. We often collect data from individual persons by using questionnaires and surveys. Environmental data are collected in multiple ways. An epidemiologist might collect a sample of water from a stream to test for certain contaminants. Healthcare providers also collect data. They collect a considerable amount of data during the course of their daily clinical practice. Data from non-health related sources, such as financial and legal records, are gathered and reviewed from sales, court proceedings, arrest, and a host of other examples. Examples of non-health related sources, data sources that provide key data are cigarette sales and the number of intoxicated driver arrests. After data is collected, hypotheses are tested, trends are evaluated, and factors between groups are compared. By conducting studies, epidemiologists are attempting to discover if a causal association exists between an exposure or risk factor and a health outcome by making comparisons of factors between groups. For example, epidemiologists frequently compare data regarding ill persons with those of well persons. Or the epidemiologist might compare data for a group of persons exposed to a risk factor with those who are not exposed to see if these outcomes are different for each group. To test hypotheses, the commonly used study designs are cross-sectional study designs, cohort, or case control approach. Cross-sectional study is similar to a survey in that it provides a snapshot of the population at a point in time. Using this study, epidemiologist defines the target population, then collects data from the population or a subset of the population at a specific point in time. In essence, individuals are defined according to their exposure and disease at that single point in time. Participants are selected regardless of their exposure or disease status. An example is the regular surveys that are carried out here in the US. There's one of them that is called the NHANES data, that when these data are actually collected, they are collected like annually, and epidemiologists can actually decide to study the particular effect of a risk factor on a health outcome. For instance, the effect of cigarette smoking on lung cancer, based on the kind of data that has been collected from those particular group of people. But the most important thing in a cross-sectional study is that these participants are not followed over time. This data is collected at a single point in time, and that's it. Cohort studies. In a cohort study, the epidemiologist selects the population, then categorizes each person by whether he or she was exposed to one or more risk factors of interest. Participants are followed over time to determine if a disease or condition develops. Cohort studies could actually be prospective when you follow participants forward in time, or retrospective when you actually go like back in time in relation to when the exposure data, that's risk factor data, was actually collected. In essence, one classic thing about cohort study design is the fact that when participants are enrolled into the study, the disease of interest has not yet occurred. So data on the exposure of interest, depending on the research question, is actually collected at the beginning of the study. And then some time will elapse, and then you now collect your outcome data to now try to analyze the effect of the particular risk factor or exposure on the outcome of interest. Case control study design compares one group who has disease or health condition, referred to as cases, with the other group that does not have the disease, known as the controls. In essence, cases and controls are compared for the presence or absence of one or more specific exposures or risk factor. An example could be if one wants to study the effect of smoking on stomach cancer. This study design is an efficient and interesting study design because sometimes epidemiologists want to study a particular outcome, but that outcome could be rare. And if an outcome is rare, it means that if you were to conduct, for instance, a prospective study design, you might have to follow the study population for more than 50 years just to get one or a few outcomes. But case control study designs are interesting in that initially when you enroll study participants into the study, you actually enroll study participants based on their disease status. So the disease of interest has already occurred. The disease of interest you're trying to evaluate for has actually occurred. So you actually pick your cases, and from the same source population that gave rise to the cases, you pick your controls and then make a comparison of the exposure of interest and then analyze to find out what are the effects of that particular exposure of interest on your outcome of interest. Experimental studies is under interesting study design, but it's rarely carried out due to ethical constraints and all that. But one interesting thing here in experimental studies is that the subjects are defined on the basis of their assigned exposure and followed for disease. So the difference between experimental studies and cohort studies classically is the fact that the investigator, the researcher, the epidemiologist assigns the exposure for experimental studies. So for instance, if you're trying to study the efficacy of a vaccine, you actually will get a study population, randomize patients into study population into those who receive the vaccine and those who will receive the vaccine. Assign that vaccine to those who receive the vaccine, follow them up in time, and then collect data to see the effect of that vaccine. While in cohort studies, it's like a natural experiment. The exposures you're trying to evaluate for in relationship to a particular health outcome of interest naturally already occur in the population due to differences in lifestyle habits, age, and a host of other reasons. This is another knowledge check, which you can do at home. Another one. The last topic we'll go to will be investigating an outbreak. Epidemiology is not a science conducted in a vacuum. Epidemiologists are in the field every day, putting their expertise to use. One way epidemiologists apply their knowledge is by using 10 steps involved in investigating an outbreak, and these steps include establishing the existence of an outbreak, preparing for field work, verifying the diagnosis, identifying and defining cases, using descriptive epidemiology, developing hypotheses, evaluating the hypothesis, refining the hypothesis, implementing control and prevention measures, and communicating findings. Only in theory do the steps proceed in order. In practice, they are adjusted depending on the outbreak. So we'll go through each of these 10 steps by using the Legionnaires' disease example. After such a substantial number of American Legion Conference attendees with similar symptoms were admitted to the hospital, emergency departments or those examined in the were admitted to the hospital emergency departments or examined in doctors' offices, an initial investigation began. During step 1, epidemiologists were able to establish the existence of Legionnaires' disease outbreak by reviewing records and data from multiple sources that confirmed the disease cases, which were thought at the time to be pneumonia only. It was actually indeed higher than the normal from the previous weeks or months. Step 2 involved preparing for fieldwork by researching the outbreak, gathering necessary supplies and equipment, and making travel arrangements. The epidemiologists also consulted with other entities such as healthcare workers and the local health departments to determine everyone's role in the investigation and to learn who the local contacts will be after arriving on the scene. During step 3, the epidemiologists ensured that the problem was accurately diagnosed by speaking with patients and reviewing laboratory findings and clinical test results. After a diagnosis was established, a standard set criteria, also known as a case definition, was established as step 4 to determine whether a person should be categorized as having disease or condition. 4 components typically are included in a case definition, including clinical information about the disease, what signs and symptoms have actually been observed. Second thing is the characteristics about persons who are affected. Do any commonalities exist among those who have been ill? The third thing is information about the location or place. What are the persons affected? Where are the persons affected located? The fourth thing is specification of time during which the illness onset occurs. What date or time did the illness begin to occur? And what was the symptom duration? During an outbreak, the case definition can evolve, typically becoming more specific as more information becomes available. To assist epidemiologists in identifying Legionnaires' disease cases, public health nurses made rounds at local Philadelphia hospitals to gather data about those who became ill and to verify the diagnosis. Meanwhile, the laboratory samples and clinical examinations were tested and reviewed. After the initial case definition was established, healthcare facilities such as doctors' offices, clinics, laboratories, and hospitals were contacted to request that any observations of these illnesses matching the case definition should be reported. Step 5 involves using descriptive epidemiology to describe Legionnaires' disease and orient the data by identifying what, who, where, when, why, and how. After these were identified, the epidemiologists proceeded to study the dates, times, places, and persons. This graph indicates the number of Legionnaires' disease cases by day in July and August 1976. Remember that these are the number of cases and not the disease rate. That arrow indicates that the number of cases peaks from July 25 to July 27, and the number declines thereafter. We can infer that the number of cases started soon after the convention began. By the end of the convention, the number of cases had reached its peak. However, this descriptive analysis only tells us what can be read directly from the graph and data. Analytic processes take us one step further to the hypothesis and assessment of the causes for the trend identified by this descriptive analysis. This table lists the rates of illness among American Legion delegates by age and where they were staying. Hotel A or another hotel, as you can see. Let's see what the data tells us. The age group that has the highest percentage of ill persons is those aged 70 years or older, as you can see from the highlights, regardless of where they were staying. In combining all age groups, those who stayed in Hotel A have the highest percentage of illness, 9.0 versus 5.34% versus 6.8% at Hotel B and C, respectively. During steps 6, 7, and 8, a focused hypothesis, that's theories that can be tested for validity, about Legionnaire's disease was developed regarding how and why the outbreak occurred. They were then evaluated for validity and refined as needed. One hypothesis stated that the illness was associated with convention attendees who were guests at or had visited one particular hotel during their time at the convention. Epidemiologists on this outbreak investigation tested this hypothesis by conducting a randomized telephone survey of guests registered at 4 hotels during July 6 through August 7th, including hotels where the conventioners had stayed or had not stayed. Reviewing hotel data by interviewing hotel employees who had become ill during the convention for 2 days. Reviewing hospital emergency department admission data, collecting environmental samples from selected locations in Hotel A, reviewing weather records for any correlation between a weather event and onset of illness, interviewing hotel guests and workers about places they visited, people they met with, and foods eaten during the convention, and conducting 2 case control studies. Although exposure to the outbreak apparently occurred over several days, investigation results were initially unclear. Researchers were unable to locate the bacteria that caused the Legionnaire's disease outbreak because of the difficulty growing the bacteria under laboratory conditions. 5 months after the first cases of Legionnaire's disease occurred, results of the case control study indicated that spending time in the lobby of Hotel A was a risk factor for the illness. In December 1976, a CDC laboratorian successfully located the source bacteria after continuing to test the specimens that were thought to be dead. A new bacterium that had caused this disease was discovered. After isolating this bacteria, conditions at Hotel A were investigated to determine their connection with the onset of illness. Similar bacteria grew in warm waters in nature, such as hot springs, and also had been identified in air-conditioned cooling towers. Investigators concluded that those who had become ill in Philadelphia had inhaled air from the air conditioning unit at Hotel A, either as guests or while walking on the sidewalk outside the hotel. They also noted that hotel workers who had not become ill were believed to have built up some form of immunity, which explained why the outbreak did not appear to have affected hotel employees. After the cause of the disease was identified, outbreak investigators moved on to step 9. To minimize the growth of bacteria that causes Legionnaire disease, controls were implemented, such as chlorination of water and testing industrial air handling systems. During step 10, investigation findings were communicated to local health authorities, the medical community, the general public, lawmakers, and other leaders. Usually, the findings are reported in an oral briefing to health authorities and those responsible for implementing control and prevention measures. During the briefing, epidemiologists will typically describe what they did and how they did it, what they learned, and what should be done about the illness. The findings are also written up in reports containing an introduction, background, methods, results, discussions, and recommendations. These reports serve not only as a record, but as a tool for future investigation and as a contribution to the scientific knowledge base. This knowledge check can be answered during our private reading time, same as this one, and this one, and the next one. Before we wrap up, let's review what we've learned today. During this course, we've been able to define and classify epidemiology, describe the basic terminology and concepts of epidemiology, identify types of data sources, identify basic methods of data collection and interpretation, identify epidemiologic study designs, describe a public health problem in terms of time, person, and place, and identify the key components of descriptive epidemiology outbreak investigation. It's time for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onako. I think that it may be better if we type questions in the chat box, and then you can answer them since we have quite a number of participants. And then, after you answer the questions, I'm going to give a chance for Professor Victor Alade to say a few words, who is, essentially the founder of this university, to say a few words to the participants. Okay, so please go ahead and type your questions. I really like the class, Dr. Onako, partly because as you were going through those slides, I was just thinking, what are some of the ways that we can apply this knowledge to what's happening, with the COVID-19 pandemic? I think I really liked also the fact that you were able to distinguish between what an epidemic is, what's a pandemic, what's all those differences, and I think would you mind explaining a little bit about how people come across around the classification that COVID-19 is a pandemic?
Yeah, how we come across the fact that it was now a pandemic was just due to the fact that the epidemic had surpassed the particular geographic location in which the disease occurred initially, which was Wuhan, China, and had now spread across the globe in multiple continents. So that's what made it a pandemic. So initially, when it had started in Wuhan, China, that's how most pandemics actually start. Initially, it was actually an epidemic. It was an epidemic and not an endemic disease because it was an emerging infection, and the amount of cases that were seen had surpassed like what has ever been seen within that geographic region, because the virus that actually causes that disease is also in the same family of the virus that actually causes SARS, which also started in China. So once, due to Atlantic travel from all sorts and all that, we had different parts of the globe having the same infection. It became a pandemic immediately. Yeah,
because I know the World Health Organization, had to wait for a while before they finally decided to classify as a pandemic. And obviously that means, it becomes a much more serious, a different level of it. So one question that I was thinking also in the back of my mind is, what do you define as a specific geographic region? In this case, do you mean Wuhan in China, or do you mean China as a whole, or do you mean the continent of Asia? So when do you say it's gone beyond just one location?
Typically, when it's gone beyond the particular country or continental region, then it becomes a pandemic. So because it had now spread to Europe, North America, Africa, like aside the particular location in which that outbreak was identified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have a first question that I can see here.
I'm sorry, Prof.
Yeah.
This
Yes.
is Tolu. I just wanted to say that if we have people who want to ask questions verbally, they can do that. But
Okay.
it would be nice if they can signify. And to signify that you want to ask a question, just click on your name in the user list and then choose set status and raise your hand. And Prof can see your hand raised and then call your name. Then you unmute yourself, ask your question, then mute yourself back so that that can go on in an orderly manner. Otherwise, people can just type their questions if they want to.
Yeah, that's good. Good to have that option.
Mm.
Okay, so one of the questions I see here on the stream, Dr. Onako, is that please, can you explain how an experimental study is analytical epidemiology study?
Yes. So because I had said earlier that analytical studies are actually studies that test hypotheses, they don't just describe like time, person, place, and time. They actually go on to actually analyze the effects of a risk factor or an exposure on an outcome. If you look at experimental studies, the way the design is set up, what happens is that, so for instance, the research question is to test the efficacy of a vaccine. So usually what will happen is the investigator will define his study population and then randomize the study population into those that receive the vaccine and those that won't receive the vaccine. Assign these vaccines to respectively, follow them up in time, and collect data regarding the exact outcome of interest the investigator is interested in. So in this case, is the vaccine, as in the efficacy of the vaccine. And so when that data is collected, we will typically analyze that data to understand the relationship between the effect of the vaccine and the outcome, which is the efficacy. How well is that vaccine going to be in preventing people from getting, in protecting people from coming down with a particular infectious agent of interest. And so since for what I've explained, experimental study designs actually now analyzes like data in such a way that you're able to see the relationship between a risk factor or an exposure of interest and a particular outcome. It makes it analytical.
Great. So that question was from Acham. I hope that helped. Yeah, I see a question about, basically saying this is a wonderful overview. So that's really nice. Yeah, and that's right. So we're going to have this recorded lecture. We're going to post that online on the Moodle platform. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the class, we do have a series of videos there already. And some of those videos are really focused on COVID-19. And the assignment for this week really is going to allow you to apply what you've learned from this lecture in that particular situation. So that's a really good, I think this course is really timely, given that we're dealing with this situation now. Before I read the next question, I think I'm actually really curious about your thoughts on, the use of chloroquine and the clinical trials that are supposed to go into that. Should people use chloroquine now? What do you think?
I'm on defense about that because ideally, though we know that chloroquine has been safely used for the prevention of malaria, but because this is like a pandemic, and chloroquine has not really been routinely tested in some other populations aside, a specific group of population, it will actually be nice if the regular regulations are adhered to, which is before something is going to be used for a particular treatment of disease, for the treatment of a particular disease process, it should go to the regular testings, which is the clinical trial stage, so that it's always good when we follow protocol sometimes, so that at every point we have proof that yes, this is the reason why we have to do this, and these are the reasons why we feel this should be used for that stuff.
Yeah. So you agree with Dr. Fauci?
Yes, I do. I do.
All right. Okay. Let's see what other questions here.
There are about 2 or 3 people who have raised their hands to ask questions.
Okay. Let's see.
Dr. Aminu and Dr. Yusuf have raised their hands.
Okay. So the first person should ask the question then.
Okay. Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello,
Go
yeah.
ahead, Dr. Aminu. We can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ma, for the wonderful presentation. My question is, please, with regard to the cross-sectional studies and cohort studies. I know in cohort studies, a group of people that share common characteristics are recruited for the study. I want to know what is actually the difference between cohort and cross-sectional, because from the word cross-sectional, as if those who are selected in cross-sectional also have share some characteristics that made them to fall into the group. So I want to help me shed more light on the difference between cross-sectional studies and cohort studies. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for that question. So in cross-sectional studies, the important landmark, the important difference is the fact that the exposures of interest and the outcomes of interest, data on these exposures and data of interest are collected from a particular study population at the same point in time. So for instance, when we're filling surveys, even if it is regular health surveys, you feel like when you have to be employed at work or be enrolled into the army or some other sort, all those questions they have to ask: name, age, occupation, do you smoke, do you drink, and do you have a heart disease? When those surveys are actually conducted, from what I've mentioned, do you smoke, do you drink, some of the questions, then do you have a heart disease, are you diabetic? A researcher could be like, okay, do you know what, I want to cut costs on conducting a research by looking at, for instance, the effect of smoking on the incidence of heart disease. And so instead of having a study population that I had to follow over time, rather I could just go to the database, use data that has been collected through surveys, and then analyze the effect of an exposure on an outcome. So exposure and outcome data are usually collected at a single point in time. That study population is never followed forward in time. There's no extra contact that is ever done. Okay, but in cohort studies, what happens is that the researcher has a research question of interest. So for instance, the effect of smoking on lung cancer. And then what a researcher does is he assembles like a study population based on eligibility criteria, right? And then ascertains, divides that study population into 2 groups based on their exposure status. So in this case, I said the effect of smoking on lung cancer. So I will have to, initially collect data on the exposure to ask questions on smoking. So it could be, do you smoke? And then some people will answer yes, some people will answer no. Based on that question, I will divide the study population into 2, smokers and non-smokers. Now, since I'm looking at the effect of smoking on lung cancer, I'll also make sure that at the beginning of that study, I will also ask questions on who has lung cancer. Because if you already have lung cancer, you're not at risk of getting the lung cancer again. Yeah. So those that will have lung cancer, of course, will not meet the eligibility criteria. I will not join that study. So at the beginning of that study, the study population is disease-free from the particular disease of interest you're trying to study. And then over time, so if for instance, I'm conducting a 5-year study, I won't wait till the end of 5 years to now contact them, because I will lose some of them to follow up. Some of them might change residence and all that. Some of them could even have died from other causes. So every year I keep having contact with them, to make sure that they are still in my study. And I start updating data on, how they are doing, how they are faring. Has anyone come down with lung cancer till the end of the defined period of study? At the end of the study, I will now have to, after collecting all the data I needed on the outcome of interest, I would have had data on the exposure of interest, data on outcome of interest. I use this data, analyze data to see the effect of smoking on lung cancer. So for cross-sectional studies, we don't follow the participants over time. They fill out a survey on exposure and outcome at the same point in time, and that's it. But for cohort studies, we follow them forward in time.
Okay, so 1 point and follow up. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes,
Thank you, ma'am.
you're welcome.
Great. Who else put up their hand? They can answer. They can ask a question. Was that Dr. Bernard?
Dr. Yusuf, you only connected with your with your earphone, no microphone, so you won't be able to speak for us to hear you. What you can do is you can click on the phone icon at the bottom of the screen to disconnect, then connect back, but this time around use microphone. So we'll go to the next person, who is Dr. Common Mary Cool something.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, thank you very much for the lecture. Are you getting me?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. I want to ask a bit about case definition, especially in clinical criteria. Okay, like let's take COVID-19 for example. Is there a particular frequency in which you must find a certain sign or a symptom in the people before you define it as a case, as a criteria? Like, let's take one of the criteria, one of the symptoms for the case respiratory distress.
Mm.
Do you need to see it at a certain frequency in the population you are studying for it to be part of your criteria?
Actually, the case definitions are usually dependent on, the symptoms that were first noticed or reported at random and frequently for, doctors, nurses, other health practitioners to alert, the local ministry and say, oh my God, I think we're having like an influx of patients suddenly with like this particular characteristics of symptoms. So the case definition for COVID was actually gotten the same way, in which the local doctors, like at Wuhan, China, and other health practitioners had to alert like their local health authorities and had to mention that they had, an oversurge of people having like fever, cough that was not productive, some form of breathlessness, and then was it possible to investigate further on what is exactly happening? So the case definitions are actually defined upon the initial like presentations that are seen frequently. So you don't have to characterize, like you said, the breathlessness to a particular extent. Now, initial case definition could actually evolve over time depending on how like we keep seeing trends, especially when it comes to emerging infections like COVID-19, because since it's emerging, everybody's like trying to learn on the job what's happening, what's different, what can we do better to make sure we curb the situation. So naturally, the case definition will naturally like evolve over time depending on if there are like changes to be made or tweaked, but it's totally dependent on the initial signs and symptoms that healthcare providers would have noticed that among a particular population at the time when the epidemic has been defined already. I hope it answers your question. Hello, Mary.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you very much. That was helpful.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any more questions? I see one from Molo Mercy. She said, how do we determine the mode of transmission in the case of COVID-19 pandemic for the purpose of infection control? I am still not sure if this is just contact or airborne.
Well, the mode of, the way we determine the mode of transmission in the case of COVID-19 for the purpose of infection control was, like I maybe had explained initially from what the question I initially answered, was based upon, when healthcare providers initially had noticed that, okay, there was a sudden surge of people complaining of similar symptomatologies and they were respiratory in nature. The laboratory scientists, of course, that are attached to these healthcare facilities had to quickly start studying, okay, what could be the infectious agent that is here? And then based upon the fact that the cases were like the symptoms were respiratory in nature. The first form of transmission anyone would think of a respiratory infection would be from infected air droplets, and that was why they had to advise that if you were infected, make sure you're wearing a face mask and all that, and then you should maintain distance, like the social distancing that we're now practicing now. But then on further testing, as we got to know about the virus and all the characteristics of the virus, it was also noted that this infected the virus, when they are on surfaces, last for a particular period of time on different surfaces. The amount of time they last on, maybe on a wooden surface, is kind of different from the amount of time they last maybe when they're on slabs or something. And so that's why the advice was also that even if you feel like it's airborne, which is through infected droplets, when these viruses are aerosolized and they land on surfaces, they could linger for a while. So it's also good that though you're washing your hands and making sure they are maintaining like distance from those that might be potentially infected, but make sure that all the surfaces around your vicinity are like clean and disinfected, due to the fact that it was very, very clear that this virus could stay for a particular period of time on different surfaces depending. So it's actually airborne, and it could be due to contact from surfaces. So when you touch the surface and you didn't wash your hand, and you now touched your nose, your face in any way, of course, that is how you still get the infection.
Yeah. And now we are learning more about the virus. We actually learned, you can transmit the virus even without having symptoms. And, that has really changed the way that, it's even done here in the United States now. And when they're asking us to use a, cloth, even to cover our faces when we go to school.
Yeah.
Is that going to help? Do you think that's going to help?
Well, I think Mayor Baker said that because at this point, I was a bit skeptical actually when I saw that, because I knew very well like there's a reason why the surgical mask, gives some form of protection. I wonder what a cloth mask will actually do. But I see the reasoning behind that. Since people that are asymptomatic could also still spread the infection, and you never really be able to know, I think the advice is just for everyone to be safe. So whether you're feeling sick or not, just have like a face mask so that possibly you won't be a spreader, or you won't get an infection from someone that is close by at this point.
Yeah. And I mean, I get the concern. The concern from the CDC has been that, when you cover your face, sometimes you can have a false sense of security. So you feel like, okay, I'm safe now and I'm protected. I can do anything. I can even greet people, so we have to realize that, by putting that on, we must be still conscious that the most important way to do this is by social distancing and washing our hands and stuff.
Yeah.
Very true. Okay, so I really want to thank you, Professor Onaku, for this brilliant lecture. I think, we'll be able to get additional questions, and we're going to post that on Moodle and and you can answer those from there. I would like to give a chance to Professor Mbarika, who is the founder of the ICT University. We're very honored that he could join this lecture. I'm sorry. So we're going to give a chance to Professor Mbarika to say a few words.
Okay, can you hear me, Will?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I want to first thank Professor Wilfred Ngwa, who is coordinating this course. He's my good friend and colleague for a long time. And we are really, really honored. And I want to thank Dr. Professor Emanuela, who did this brilliant presentation. I sat through it. I know very little about epidemiology. I want to give this disclaimer. I am a professor of ICT, and I'm learning a lot of things. The role of ICT University and my role is to bring in the technology aspect, because one of my major areas I've supervised quite a number of PhD students in is in the area of telemedicine, health information technology. So I wanted to greet all the students attending. Thank you for attending, and
this is going to be an exciting course. It's
Yes.
something which will be developed eventually to even a full degree program down the road. But this is part of our MPH PhD program of courses. And Professor Ngwa, you may not be aware of this, but we've invited members of some societies, medical societies in Africa, to join just this particular course, not our whole program. And so there are a number of participants here that are not fully our students, but they are joining as participants. And so we're excited to have them on here. I received an email with someone asking, given that looking at the syllabus, some of the courses will be ICT courses in epidemiology, ICT in healthcare, would they be able to cope if they don't have a background in ICT? So I wanted to clarify that you need absolutely no background in ICT for the technical courses. So the technical topics that will be taught, they'll be pretty straightforward, although there will be a lot of some hands-on stuff for you to do, but it will just be for you to appreciate what we mean by health information technologies. We're gonna get you on some software. Two of the classes, Professor Wilfred Ngwa has agreed for me to bring in some facilitators who will bring in some technical background on this. So you don't have to worry about being a techie. I'm sure this first class was very comfortable. It was direct, no technologies involved. So apart from you signing onto this system. And so it's going to be an exciting course, and I want to welcome each of you again, and God bless you as we go through this. Thanks, Will. Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Mbarika. Yeah, we are very excited about this course. I mean, obviously, like you said, I think it's going to be a wonderful course. I'm excited about it because, like I mentioned, even at the beginning, we want to be able to from the Global Health Catalyst program, obviously from bringing Harvard faculty and other faculty from Johns Hopkins and other institutions here, they are all excited about this possibility of this kind of innovative course where, as we've seen with COVID-19, now everything is online. It's basically ICTs have become cool. Like, everybody wants to do something, in a hospital, it's telemedicine now, it's online learning, at Harvard, and I'm sure. And so people are coming to ICT University now because you saw ahead of time, you had this vision. But I think that, what we want to do at the end of this course is also to, learn the lessons, kind of get the experience published, so that even at Harvard and other institutions can benefit from the experience of seeing how you can deliver such a course on epidemiology. And so I'm excited about, what's going to happen here. So in terms of, before we close, I just want to mention that there's going to be a series of videos that are posted online. All of you who are signed up on Moodle should have access to those. If you don't have access to that, please email us. That will be in addition to this lecture. So this lecture is also going to be posted online. So you can access that and go through it as it was recorded. And then next week, we will have an introduction into ICTs. Like Professor Mbarika mentioned, it's not going to be very complex or sophisticated. It's just going to be comfortable introduction to that. And then we will also have a guest professor next week, who is going to introduce us to that. And then after that, we can really get our feet wet into kind of looking at how we can apply this in epidemiology going forward. So I'll invite you to kind of get used to this, get online on Moodle and get used to the course environment and see what we have scheduled in the upcoming weeks. The lectures that you're going to watch online are about 90 minutes long. So that's why we're kind of stopping this class a little earlier today, and to get you all comfortable and so that you get used to the environment. But next time we should give ourselves more time to, to ask questions more, and discuss. So with that, I would like us to end the lecture for today. And once more, we want to thank our guest professor, Dr. Onaku, and maybe she'll be coming back again to answer our questions or give more lectures in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure. I would really like to come back if there are other opportunities.
Yeah,
it was a great experience. Yeah, and everyone was great. Thank you so much. I look forward to more questions posted later.
Yeah, and thank you all for joining us from Nigeria, from Cameroon, all across Africa. That's a really good thing about ICT. So, it's really nice to interact with you. Everybody should stay safe and do happy social distancing. Be careful. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.